My son smirked, hinting that I live off his money. I just pulled out the keys to his old house. The sun was low when Ethan pulled into the gravel drive, his car humming its usual polished hum. He stepped out with that confident ease he'd always carried, expensive shoes crunching over the stones, one hand holding a cake box tied in ribbon. Rachel trailed behind, already looking at her phone. They barely noticed the porch light flickering above my head. 66 looks good on you, Mom, Ethan said, setting the box down on the rusted table I had wiped twice that morning. Still enjoying the little place I set up for you? I smiled, polite and practiced. It's cozy. The converted garage had once stored his old bike, the one he'd ridden through summers past. Now it held a cot, a folding table, and a heater that wheezed through the colder nights. He called it a guest suite. I called it enough. Rachel sat in the plastic chair without looking up. She'd brought wine, but forgot a corkscrew. She tapped her screen with painted nails and sighed when the signal cut out. The garage didn't have Wi-Fi. It barely had plumbing. The birthday candles flickered against the draft from the half-open door. The cake was frosted in marzipan, with my name spelled incorrectly in glossy red letters. Still, I said thank you. Ethan leaned against the wall and chuckled. Must be nice living rent-free, huh? My hand froze on the knife I was using to cut the cake. Just for a second. Just enough to feel something cold ripple down my spine. I placed the slice gently on a plate and handed it to him. Thank you, Ethan, I said. Quiet. Even. No one noticed my fingers shaking. After the birthday, Ethan didn't visit again for nearly 3 weeks. Rachel stopped answering altogether. Her last message was a thumbs-up emoji sent in response to a reminder I'd written about a doctor's appointment. I had asked if she could drive me, just a quick trip across town. The reply came hours later, followed by another message, you should really look into Uber for seniors. I didn't reply. I simply rescheduled the appointment, circled it on the calendar pinned above my hot plate, and made a mental note not to ask again. Ethan, for his part, remained diligent in only one way, he sent weekly summaries of expenses. Screenshots, sometimes full spreadsheets, each one annotated with small, cheerful notes. Garage heating, $412 this month. Guess winter's not done with us yet, huh? Or paid for pest control, wasn't sure if those were ants or termites lol. The way he framed it made it sound like a gift. Like charity. Like he was doing me a favor, keeping me warm in the box behind his house. I never asked for heating. Never asked for pest control. What I remembered was the day I signed the transfer papers on the house I'd once owned, the one Ethan now lived in with his wife and his walls full of curated art prints. I signed it over, thinking it was the right thing. A legacy. A gesture of faith in the future. He called it streamlining things. He said it would keep taxes low. That garage wasn't part of the plan. It had been an afterthought, a project Ethan took on with a vague nod to keeping me close. He gutted it, painted it white, installed a shelf above the sink where Rachel had placed 3 mason jars filled with pebbles. She said they were decorative. I said thank you. Sometimes, I'd sit on the edge of the cot at night and watch the light from the main house flicker behind the blinds. Voices would carry, laughter, a blender, the faint thud of music. My name was never part of it. I was close, but I wasn't in. Once, I invited them to Sunday lunch. Just something simple, boiled potatoes, salmon, a tart I'd made with bruised apples from the corner grocer. Rachel replied with a text, we'll try next month. Spa retreat this weekend. You'll be fine, won't you? I read the words twice. Then again. You'll be fine. I sat at the folding table that Sunday with the tart untouched and a damp cloth over the potatoes. The salmon spoiled by mid-afternoon. I packed everything into Tupperware, labeled them with dates, and stacked them carefully in the miniature fridge. A few days later, I heard Rachel telling a friend over speakerphone that the garage was perfect for her mother-in-law, out of the way, but close enough if she falls or something. Out of the way. I stopped asking after that. Instead, I filled the hours with quiet rituals. I sorted buttons into jars. Rehemmed my skirts. Wrote lists I didn't intend to complete. I read the same newspaper twice, underlining typos, pretending they mattered. The cot creaked louder when I rolled over. The heater clicked off sometimes in the middle of the night. I stopped mentioning it. The only sign I was still part of their life came on the first of the month, when Ethan would stop by with a new bulb for the motion light outside. He never knocked. Just unscrewed the old one, slid in a new one, and walked back through the garden without looking toward the garage door. Sometimes, I imagined opening it mid-task, startling him, breaking the rhythm. But I never did. I stayed behind the curtain, quiet as the cobwebs on the ceiling. One Tuesday, I stepped out to take in the bins and noticed the mailbox had been relabeled. A shiny brass plaque now read E&R Walker. My name, Janice, had been painted over. I stood there a moment, fingers grazing the letters that used to be mine. That night, I ran my hand over the old scrapbook I kept under the cot. Photographs, pressed flowers, a hospital bracelet from the day Ethan was born. I touched the page with his baby footprint. Black ink, smudged slightly at the heel. I closed it carefully and slid it back under the frame. Weeks passed. Rachel needed the garage cleared for insulation. She sent a message with a list of items to discard: the side table, my sewing machine, anything non-essential. I looked at my belongings: 3 dresses, 2 pots, 1 cracked bowl, a stack of library books, and wondered which part of me counted as clutter. I answered politely, asking if the insulation could wait until spring. Her reply came quickly. "I'm sorry, Janice. We've got to think of resale value." Resale. The word hung in the air like smoke. The next morning, I stood in the middle of the garage and tried to measure how much space I truly occupied. Not square feet. Just presence. It wasn't much. I took down the curtains I'd sewn myself and folded them slowly. I unscrewed the coat hook from the wall. I wrapped the sewing machine in an old towel and placed it in the corner. That afternoon, a truck arrived from a storage company, booked, I later learned, in Ethan's name. A man knocked gently, clipboard in hand. "Ma'am, we're here to help move the items to the unit." He didn't say my name. Didn't ask what was staying. I didn't argue. I let them take what they wanted. And when they left, I stood alone in the echo of that hollow garage and finally admitted what I had known for months. I wasn't living here. I was being stored. The morning it happened, I woke earlier than usual. The cot had grown harder in recent weeks, or maybe my bones had. Either way, I sat up with a wince, reached for the kettle, and noticed the electric bill taped to the outside of the garage door. It hadn't been there before. The envelope was creased, with my name scrawled in bold across the top: Janice, FYI. No greeting. No note. Just a total, $146.32, and a yellow post-it stuck beside it: "Rachel says this should be manageable." Manageable. I placed the envelope on the folding table, straightened the edges. My fingers ran along the paper's grain, slow, deliberate. Then I walked to the corner of the garage where I kept a shallow drawer of old receipts, scraps of a life I had stopped updating long ago. I flipped through them. Grocery slips, mostly. Minor purchases. A water heater part Ethan once asked me to pick up on my way home from church. I had been so pleased to be useful that day. But the numbers didn't lie. They were beginning to demand more. The insulation work began the following week. 2 men in coveralls arrived before sunrise and started prying off the wall panels. No knock. No explanation. I sat in the garage with my coat wrapped tight, the air brittle, the noise constant. Rachel came by to inspect. She didn't look at me when she stepped inside. Just scanned the walls and clicked her tongue. "This'll be nice once it's done," she said, tapping her phone. "Ethan thinks we can turn it into a wellness room. Maybe a meditation nook." A pause. "Of course, you'll have to shift somewhere else for a bit." Shift? I asked. She blinked, as if I'd misunderstood. Oh, just for a few weeks. The construction dust isn't good for someone your age. My age. I nodded. Said nothing. Later, I found an email in my inbox from Rachel's work address. Subject line, temporary transition plan. Attached was a lease application for a senior housing complex on the outskirts of town. No message in the body. That evening, I walked into the main house. I hadn't done that in months. The hallway smelled of lavender and new paint. I recognized none of the furniture. Even the family photos had been rearranged: Ethan and Rachel in Iceland, Ethan and Rachel at a gala, Ethan and Rachel on a beach. My face was in none of them. Ethan stood by the kitchen island, tapping away on his laptop. He looked up. Mom? I held out the envelope. What's this? He asked. My electric bill. Your note. Rachel's new lease plan. He shifted uncomfortably. It's just temporary. You can't stay in the garage during renovations. And after? He hesitated. We'll see. Maybe we can figure something out. The place will have more flow. I studied his face. The same jawline I had kept as a baby, now stiff with impatience. Flow, I said, and turned back toward the garage. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I laid out every document I could find: old property records, bank statements, a faded envelope from my late husband that I'd never opened. Inside was a copy of the title deed from before Ethan and Rachel moved in. My name. Sole owner. I stared at it for a long time. They'd asked me to sign it over years ago, under the guise of simplification. I'd refused then. Not out of suspicion, just stubborn habit. I didn't like legalese. Ethan hadn't pushed. But he must have assumed. The next morning, I called the county office. They confirmed it. The house, and the garage, still belonged to me. Ethan and Rachel were tenants in legal terms. Their names were not on the deed. I hung up and sat very still. A dull warmth pooled in my chest, not joy, not revenge. Just clarity. I spent the day sorting papers. Quietly. Carefully. That evening, I baked a loaf of banana bread and walked to the main house. I let myself in with the key they had forgotten I still carried. Rachel was at the dining table, reading emails. Ethan stood at the counter, pouring wine. Smells good, he said, eyeing the loaf. I set it down between them. Then I placed the title deed beside it. Flattened the page. Smoothed the creases. This is mine, I said softly. Rachel looked confused. Ethan blinked. What is this? The house, I said. And the garage. All of it. He leaned in, scanning the page. But you said. I never signed it over. Rachel's face changed then. Tightened. You kept that from us? I didn't answer. Ethan's voice dropped. Are you trying to make a point, Mom? No. I'm making a decision. I turned and walked out, the smell of banana bread still warm behind me. In the days that followed, I contacted a lawyer. Not for eviction. Not for spite. Just for boundaries. Rachel's lease application sat untouched on the folding table. The electric bill remained unpaid. The insulation crew stopped showing up. And the garage grew quiet again, clean, still, untouched. I began packing, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Sometimes the hardest part isn't leaving. It's realizing you could have done it sooner. I didn't tell them I was leaving. There were no announcements, no confrontations. I simply let the days pass in silence, and silence did all the work. I stopped answering texts. Ethan sent 3 in a row one morning, short, clipped. Everything okay? You still need anything from the main house? Rachel wants to finalize the garage plans. I didn't reply. That was the first boundary I set. They knocked twice over the next week. Not together. Never at the same time. Rachel came midday while Ethan was at work, her heels clicking on the gravel, her hand raised halfway before deciding not to knock again. She waited a moment, checked her phone, then left. Ethan tried one evening, standing outside with a takeout bag, looking unsure. He knocked once, called my name, then left the food by the door like a peace offering. I didn't open it. Inside the garage, I was preparing, not for a fight, but for departure. A quiet sorting of self. I emptied drawers that hadn't been used in months, folded clothes with care, packed the sewing machine back into its box. I took down the calendar, marked only with appointments they'd set for me. And I made a list. The kind I hadn't written in years. Places to see. A bench in the state park I used to sit on with my husband. A diner in Carlton that served pecan pie thick with molasses. A bus schedule. The name of a woman I'd met once at a quilting fair, who'd moved out to Birch Hollow and said I could always visit. It felt strange, making plans for myself. Most of my days for the last decade had been scheduled around others, Rachel's calls, Ethan's errands, grandchild visits that came less and less often. I had forgotten how to fill a day without being needed. Now, the absence was mine to design. I found a box of postcards in a drawer, unwritten, collected from places I'd never been. I placed one on the table. It showed a field of sunflowers. On the back, in small print, it said, "Always turning toward the light." That night, I wrote one short line on it. "You'll be fine without me." That's what you always wanted, wasn't it? I didn't address it. Just left it on the cot. Let them find it when they realized I was gone. The morning I left, I locked the garage carefully. I left the key under the potted plant by the door, the same one Rachel used to water, before she decided it clashed with her exterior aesthetic and replaced it with smooth gravel. I didn't take much. Just one suitcase. The sewing machine. My savings, recently moved to a new account under only my name. And the photograph of Ethan at age 6, sitting on my lap in the garden with a dandelion crown on his head. The woman in the photo looked proud. She didn't know she'd one day be living in a converted garage behind the house she once owned. I didn't cry. I walked past the main house slowly. The curtains were drawn. The mailbox still bore their names. I looked once at the window where the light used to be left on for me. It was off. The bus station was quiet that morning. Just me and a man in an old army jacket reading a paper from last week. I didn't need conversation. I didn't need warmth. I just needed distance. The ride out of town was smooth. Familiar roads blurred past the window, places I used to visit, now receding like forgotten ideas. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but that was the point. I had spent too long staying put for the comfort of others. I would rather be nowhere than somewhere I was resented. When the bus pulled into the next town, I stepped off with a small ache in my knees but a clear head. I checked into a modest guesthouse run by a woman named Anna. She didn't ask many questions. Just handed me the key and said breakfast was at 8, if I wanted it. I did. That night, I sat on the bed with the window cracked open. A breeze drifted in, carrying the scent of pine and something faintly sweet. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once and then stopped. I hadn't heard such honest quiet in years. I unpacked only the essentials. The rest could wait. Then I opened my notebook and wrote. I lived in a house I gave away. I slept in a garage they called a gift. And when they stopped pretending, I stopped waiting. The pen moved slowly. My hand steadier than it had been in weeks. They taught me silence. I taught myself how to leave. The town I settled in wasn't remarkable. A modest cluster of brick buildings, a post office with limited hours, a cafe that closed by 4. But it had what I needed: anonymity, space, and time. I rented a small unit behind a bookstore. 1 bedroom, uneven floorboards, a kitchen with cupboards that creaked. The landlord, Mr. Fuller, didn't ask much beyond my first check. I paid in advance for 6 months. He looked surprised but said nothing. I liked that. I moved slowly, letting the days shape themselves around simple tasks. Mornings began with a pot of tea and the hum of the old radiator. I walked to the library 3 blocks away, where the librarian wore sweaters with owls and let me borrow more than the limit. She didn't know my story. She didn't ask. Afternoons were for letters. Not to Ethan. Not to Rachel. Not to anyone, really. Just letters to the space I left behind. Letters never meant to be sent. Dear silence, thank you for teaching me what noise I could live without. Dear kitchen table, I miss your chipped corner and the way morning light spilled over you. Dear self, I'm sorry it took this long. I stacked the letters in a tin box beside the bed. It had once held sewing needles. Now it held something finer. My voice returned. The lawyer I contacted, her name was Donna, was young, direct, and never spoke louder than necessary. She met me at a cafe outside town, legal pad in hand, espresso already cooling beside her. She didn't blink when I explained my situation. She listened, wrote, nodded. You still own the property? She asked. Yes, I said. And the bank account access? Already moved. Everything's now under my sole name. She paused. What do you want to do? I want to formalize distance, I replied. Cleanly. Quietly. Permanently. We worked through it over 3 meetings. She filed papers transferring ownership of the house to a holding trust, one they couldn't touch. She redrafted my will. She submitted a financial audit request, routine, she said, but pointed. 3 weeks later, I received a letter from Ethan's investment firm. The phrasing was professional. The undertone was alarm. Dear Ms. Walker, we've identified some inconsistencies in your account's secondary management. We request a meeting at your earliest convenience. Rachel had been moving funds, small amounts, labeled as household upkeep. Some reached her personal accounts. Donna said it wasn't uncommon. Hard to prosecute. But not hard to expose. I didn't press charges. I just reclaimed control. And I didn't send a notice. I didn't explain. I simply stopped their access. Rachel found out the following Friday. She arrived at the garage to drop off a new yoga mat rack for the wellness room, only to discover the door padlocked, her keys useless. A note on the door, in my handwriting, no longer in residence. Do not enter. She called Ethan, who arrived 20 minutes later. Together, they stood outside the locked garage like it was a museum exhibit, something familiar but unreachable. She knocked. No answer. She texted. No reply. By then, I was sipping tea 3 towns over, watching a dog bark at a pigeon from the cafe window. They didn't know where I was. They still don't. But I heard, eventually, through an old church acquaintance who forwarded me a group message Rachel sent, marked urgent. Has anyone heard from Janice? She's vanished. Ethan says the bank froze a few things. We think she's having a breakdown. A breakdown. Funny. I'd never felt clearer. I didn't respond. I let them wonder. Ethan sent one message, months later. If you're okay, please just say something. Even one word. I read it once. Then archived it. Because some silences aren't cruel. They're earned. The house still stood, but the name on the deed was mine alone. I had redirected the mailing address to a P.O. box near the bookstore. I paid the property tax early. I removed their digital permissions. I changed the locks. Ethan could afford another house. Rachel, another project. I, however, could not afford another life. This one, small, unobtrusive, wholly mine, was enough. Rachel was the first to try calling again. Not to apologize. Not to ask where I'd gone. But to panic. She left 3 voicemails within a single hour, her voice climbing steadily higher. Janice, I think there's been a mistake with the bank, can you give me a call back? Then. We just need to know you're safe, okay? Ethan's really worried. And finally, shorter, clipped. I hope you're happy, wherever you are. I didn't respond. Later that week, Ethan arrived at the house. I know because the neighbor, Mrs. Phelps, who still sends me handwritten notes in the spring, said he looked lost. He didn't go to the garage. He stood at the front door, stared at the mailbox with the reinstalled J. Walker plaque, and didn't move for a long time. Eventually, he knocked. No one answered. A few days later, an envelope arrived at the forwarding address. It was addressed in Ethan's handwriting. Inside, a single sheet. I didn't know. Rachel told me you loved the garage. She said it was your idea. That you needed the quiet. I sat on the edge of my bed and read it 3 times. Nowhere in the letter did he ask where I was. Nowhere did he say he was sorry. Instead, he asked, "Are you planning to sell the house?" That was the second boundary they crossed. Even now, their concern came shaped like possession. I folded the letter and placed it beneath a stack of library books. Rachel tried again the next week. This time she used a different number, thinking perhaps I'd blocked her old one. The message came through like all the others. I need you to understand we never meant harm. We were just trying to keep things manageable. It was a lot, and I was trying to plan for our future too. She paused before saying it. I think we all needed clearer communication. She ended with, "Please don't do anything permanent with the house." That house. The one I had scrubbed, repainted, handed over. The one they never thought to ask me about again, until it slipped from their reach. I didn't answer. Because every word they wrote now came tethered to the things they didn't say when it mattered. And silence, my silence, was no longer absence. It was refusal. Still, they didn't give up. Rachel sent flowers. Not to the house. Not to the bookstore. But to the bank branch where I'd gone to finalize the trust papers. The bouquet came with a note, "We're sorry. Let's talk." The teller, Diana, a woman my age with steel-colored hair and careful hands, held the card out to me when I came in to check my accounts. "Friend of yours?" she asked gently. "No," I said, taking the card and slipping it into my purse without looking at it. "Not anymore." Word must have gotten around eventually. Because one Sunday afternoon, the doorbell at the bookstore rang and there stood Ethan. He looked tired. Not older, just worn thin, like someone used to getting his way, finally realizing there might be limits. "I asked Mrs. Phelps," he said. "She said she thought you might be here." I didn't invite him in. He didn't ask. He just stood there, hands in his coat pockets, eyes scanning the sidewalk. "I want to fix this," he said. "Why?" He hesitated. "Because you're my mother." I let that sit between us. Then I asked, "Would you have said that if I still lived behind your house?" He looked down. "I didn't know what Rachel was doing," he said. "She told me you liked the arrangement. You never asked me." He opened his mouth. Closed it. I stepped outside and pulled the door gently closed behind me. Not locked. Not shut. Just enough to signal I wouldn't be letting him inside, not yet. "I want peace, Ethan," I said. "I don't want old apologies." He nodded, slowly. "If you want to visit," I added, "you can write first. No more drop-ins. No more assumptions." He nodded again. Quiet. Then he turned, walked back toward the street where his car waited with its engine still running. That night, he didn't call. But a week later, a letter arrived. Handwritten. Thoughtful. Short. He asked how I was sleeping. Told me the dog Rachel had adopted had taken to chewing her shoes. Said he was considering leaving the firm. He didn't ask for anything. Didn't mention the house. I kept the letter. But I didn't reply. Because peace, real peace, doesn't come from small gestures made under pressure. It grows slowly, from silence, from earned space, from not being needed in the way they once needed me, as an extension of their plans. They had shaped my life for too long. Now it was my turn to shape the silence. Rachel came on a Thursday. I knew before I opened the door. Her knock had urgency. It wasn't a visitor's tap, it was the sound of someone who had run out of other routes. I opened it halfway. She looked tired, dressed in a coat too thin for the season, eyes ringed with makeup that had worn off by midday. "Janice," she said, too quickly, as if the word itself might stop the unraveling. "I just want to talk." I stepped back but didn't offer her a seat. She glanced around the small unit, eyes lingering on the sewing machine in the corner, the bookshelf with its uneven stack of old library returns, the tin box on the desk. She looked for something familiar. She found nothing. "I didn't come to argue," she said. I said nothing. She sat in the only chair without asking. Her fingers twitched over the hem of her sleeve. "I know you're angry," she began. "But I need you to understand, we were overwhelmed. The house, Ethan's work stress, the finances. I was trying to hold everything together." "You succeeded," I said softly. "You held it all together. Except me." She flinched, just slightly. "We thought the garage was a fair compromise," she said. "You never said you hated it." "I never said I loved it. I thought you appreciated the independence." I looked at her then. "No, Rachel. You appreciated the distance. You appreciated that I didn't take up your space. That I didn't interfere." She opened her mouth, then closed it. She tried again. "Look, I know things got tangled. But the house, Ethan said you might be thinking about selling. Please don't. Not yet. Just, give us time to find our footing." Ah. There it was. Not an apology. A request. A need. I crossed the room slowly and pulled the small envelope from the drawer. It held a copy of the updated deed, one with a clause that transferred ownership to a preservation trust. Untouchable. Permanent. I placed it on the table and slid it toward her. She didn't touch it. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "For the same reason you did what you did. To protect something." "What are you protecting?" "Myself." She stood abruptly, knocking the chair back. Her face flushed, not with rage, but something close to recognition. "You're shutting us out," she said. "You're walking away from your own family." I stepped forward. Just once. Close enough for her to hear the evenness in my voice. "No, Rachel. I'm walking away from the version of family you chose to make." She froze. No more half-truths. No more calls only when things break. No more caretaking in reverse. She opened her mouth to speak again, but I raised a hand. "I'm not angry," I said. "But I am done." She blinked. I nodded once toward the door. "You should go now." Her hand hovered over the envelope. She left it. At the threshold, she paused, turned. "Will you ever come back?" I looked at her, really looked, this woman who once hugged me when Ethan proposed, who once asked for my mother's casserole recipe, who now stood in the doorway of a life I had built without her. "No," I said. "I won't." And then I closed the door. It didn't slam. It didn't echo. It simply shut. I stood for a long time, one hand still on the knob, waiting to feel regret. It didn't come. Instead, I turned the kettle on, pulled out the lemon tea I saved for evenings when the air shifted, and sat by the window. Outside, a neighbor's wind chime stirred gently, a quiet series of notes barely touching the silence. No more meetings. No more mailed requests. No more arguments about shared history. The family they thought I'd always wait for had already left me, long before I left them. Now it was just me. And that, finally, was enough. The house I rented was small, but it breathed. Each morning, the light came in soft through the linen curtains, falling onto the little rug by the door, the same rug I'd crocheted in the garage while pretending Rachel's yoga mat rack wasn't being measured into the walls behind me. Here, no one measured me. I planted lavender in a borrowed flower box outside the kitchen window. The scent came in strongest just before dusk, and I'd sit by the table with a book I only half read, watching the light move across the wood like a slow tide. This time I was not surviving. I was not managing. I was simply living. I got to know the woman who owned the bookstore. Miriam. She wore scarves that never matched and always smelled faintly of peppermint. When she learned I had once sewn quilts for the church back in Granite Falls, she invited me to join the library's textile group. "We're mostly gossip and crooked stitches," she said. "But the kettle's always on." I joined, without fanfare. Every Wednesday morning, we sat around folding tables in the community room. No one asked about my past. No one knew Ethan's name or Rachel's laugh or what a converted garage feels like at midnight when the heater kicks and no one checks if you're cold. I was just Janice. I stitched slowly. Deliberately. As if every thread might sew a little more of myself back together. Ethan wrote twice more. Once a short note tucked into a card, no return address, saying he hoped I was settled. The second time, a longer letter. "I've been thinking about what you said. About caretaking in reverse. I never saw it that way. But I understand now. I hope you're doing something that makes you feel whole. Rachel and we've started therapy." He didn't ask for forgiveness. Just told me what they were doing with the silence I left behind. I appreciated that. Still, I didn't reply. Some things aren't healed with letters. I repotted the houseplants I bought from the hardware store, 2 ferns, 1 cactus that looked perpetually grumpy. I started taking morning walks, even in the cold, wrapped in the scarf I'd knitted last fall. No one stopped me. No one asked when I'd be home. On Sundays, I visited a local diner. 1 booth, corner seat, pot of coffee left at the table without needing to ask. The waitress learned my name by the second week and stopped calling me ma'am. I left generous tips, even for cold toast. It was the principle. Sometimes, people from the library sat with me. One was a woman named Nora who reminded me of my sister: sharp eyes, strong hands, stories that never needed punctuation. I told her my name was Janice. Nothing else. She never asked where I was from. Once, she said, "Funny how some people take decades to figure out who they are." I nodded. "Some of us don't figure it out until we stop being useful," I said. She smiled. "Then you must be just about ready." That evening, I walked home with a small paper bag holding a tin of cookies Nora had made for someone who remembers how to say no. I hadn't laughed in weeks. But I did then. Ethan came by once. Not to the house. To the bookstore. He didn't come inside. Just stood across the street and looked through the window. Miriam said he stayed for 10 minutes. Never asked for me. Just stood there. Then he left. I didn't feel fear. Or guilt. Just a quiet ache. The kind you get when you see the outline of something you used to love but can no longer reach. The kind that doesn't ask to be fixed. Only felt. I hung a small painting above the stove, a quiet beach, a bench, no footprints. It reminded me of the place I'd gone with my husband once, years before Ethan was born. No phones. Just the 2 of us and time. That's what this house felt like. Time returned. There was a knock once. Not Rachel. A courier, holding a padded envelope. Inside, no letter. No name. Just a single photograph. A baby girl, sleeping. And a yellow sticky note. She should know her grandmother. Please. No signature. No appeal. Just the image. I stared at it for a long time. Folded it gently. Slipped it into the tin box with the unsent letters. And closed the lid. I kept the photograph tucked away. Not out of anger. Not even out of grief. But because I knew what it was meant to do, and I had spent too many years being maneuvered by what others needed from me. That small square of glossy paper, with her tiny closed eyelids and curled fist, was not an invitation. It was bait. The sticky note read, she should know her grandmother. Please. No return address. No salutation. I looked at it again the next morning, in the soft light of the kitchen. I imagined the little girl in it, soft skin, unaware of the burdens already being wrapped around her. A ribbon of guilt. A thread of longing. I made myself tea and didn't reply. Instead, I took out the tin box and added one more letter, folded carefully. Dear child. You are not a bridge. You are not a tool. You are not an apology wrapped in a bonnet. And if someday you wonder why I was not in your photographs, your parties, or your bedtime stories, know this, I removed myself before the weight of their decisions could shape you, too. With quiet hope. That was enough. I joined the quilting group that winter in earnest. I didn't tell them about the photograph. Or the note. Or the way my breath caught each time a child's laugh rang down the library hallway. I just stitched. We made a memory quilt that season. Each member added one square from a scrap of something they loved. Mine was a faded handkerchief from my wedding day, lace fraying at the edge, the fabric thin from time. I stitched it with steadier hands than I expected. At the spring fair, we raffled off the quilt. The proceeds went to the school library. I watched it carried away in the arms of a young mother with paint under her fingernails and a toddler wrapped against her chest. It felt right. Not mine to keep. Just mine to make. One night, I walked past the park at dusk and saw a family at the swings. A man holding a paper cup of coffee, a woman pushing a stroller. Laughter rose from them like mist. For a moment, I thought of Ethan and Rachel. Of what could have been. Of the child in the photograph. Then I kept walking. The road home was lined with honeysuckle that spring. I clipped a few and placed them in a jar beside my bed. Their scent held the kind of softness I'd long stopped expecting. That week, I wrote no letters. I baked instead. A lemon cake that cracked in the middle. A batch of cornbread I shared with Miriam. She said it was too dry. I said it was honest. She laughed. You going to keep baking until something sticks? No, I said. Just until the silence stops needing translation. She didn't ask what that meant. The next Sunday, I received a call. I didn't answer. But the voicemail played. It was Ethan's voice. Mom. I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I think about you every day. I miss you. We both do. A pause. I wish we'd done it differently. Another pause. Shorter this time. Smaller. I hope you're happy. I really do. I deleted the message. Not out of spite. But because it added nothing. I was happy. Not in the way he meant it, not in the way that could be seen in pictures or family newsletters. But in the way that grows slowly, like moss over the ruins. Quiet. Sure. Complete. I hosted the quilting group that week. They brought pie. Someone played old jazz from a phone tucked into a ceramic bowl to amplify the sound. We stitched in silence for a while. Then laughter broke out over a crooked seam. I didn't miss the garage. Or the house. Or the years spent proving my usefulness through casseroles and silence. I missed who I had been before I was rewritten. And now, slowly, I was writing myself back. One square. One letter. One decision at a time. I live alone now. Not by accident. Not by abandonment. By choice. The shelves in my kitchen are no longer filled with things I bought to suit someone else's taste. The towels match, not because anyone asked them to, but because I decided blue was enough color for this chapter. There's a rhythm to my days that no longer depends on other people's plans. I wake when I'm ready. I eat when I'm hungry. I open the door not because someone is coming, but because the wind sounds like a visitor worth letting in. Once, a woman at the bookstore asked if I missed them, my family, the gatherings, the grandchild I never met. I didn't answer her directly. I just said, some people disappear slowly. I simply stopped waiting for them to notice. And she understood. Not everyone does, but enough people do. I found peace, not in being remembered, but in not being needed as proof of anyone's virtue. I've untangled myself from the legacy they tried to build on my back. From the birthdays I paid for but was never invited to. From the photographs I took but was never in. I no longer read their updates. No longer wonder if they think of me when the seasons change or when someone else mentions my name with a softness they didn't earn. This life is small. But it fits. I have a shelf of library books. A kettle that whistles when it's ready. A coat that smells of lavender and the faintness of rain. I speak to myself now, aloud sometimes, not out of loneliness but recognition. I was never weak. I was waiting. And when it became clear that my waiting served no one but those who mistook my silence for consent, I left. There was no storm. No slammed door. Just a folded curtain. A locked mailbox. A woman stepping out of her own shadow. I once believed that love meant holding on, no matter how tightly it bruised. Now I know, love is not endurance. It is not sacrifice dressed up as grace. Love, real love, does not ask you to disappear. So I didn't. They still live in the house I bought. But they do so without me. That is the truth I leave behind. No revenge. No spectacle. Just absence. Complete and final. And in that absence, I found the room I'd been denied all those years. The quietest room. The one with my name on the door. Janice. Still here. Still whole.